Marketing Podcast is kindly sponsored by Nicks and Kicks, the low-calorie, no-added sugar, vegan-friendly drink with a zing. At Target, we always have a fully stocked fridge of Nicks and Kicks as a healthy and tasty refreshment for the team. Try it yourself today in a Co-op or Waitrose near you, or you can buy it online at nicksandkicks.com.
Well, Gordon, thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Performance Marketing Podcast. So we're actually shooting here from Homegrown. I've promised Jess will do a little intro. So Homegrown, for those that don't know, is a private members club for business as unusual in Marylebone. And yeah, I mean, Gordon, is there anything you'd like to say about Homegrown? I mean, why is it so great to be a member here?
Well, I'm an ambassador,
yeah,
so
okay.
I absolutely love the club. It's like a real home from home, actually. I've run some influencer events here. I've met some amazing people. I love the fact that business is generating in a sort of an informal way. We do fashion after party, London Fashion Week after parties as well. So it's a real nice mixture of different type of events and great people.
That is true. It's the people, isn't it, that make it so great here. But I mean, yeah, thank you. As I say, thanks for joining us. And we're really going to talk about influencer marketing today, which is your specialism. But it'd be really great if we could get a bit of background on you and your journey in marketing, because from what I understand, you're now the Chief Strategy Officer at an agency, and obviously your niche is influencer marketing. So it'd be great to hear about how you got into marketing, what you're up to now, and then we'll get stuck into influencer.
Well, it's a really fascinating journey, actually, because for many years I was destined to be in the promotional products industry, because I was the Director General or Chief Exec of a trade body for 11 years, also having had my own promotional products business as well. And it was in 2018 that I just felt like I'd done everything I could really with the association, and I wanted then to set my own consultancy up to help other trade associations and membership bodies with their strategy. And one of those happened to be the Branded Content Marketing Association. And I met with the current global CEO, Andrew Cantor, in a hotel in Soho. And we were just talking generally about membership and see if we could do something together. And I just said to him before we finished, this massive growth in influencers, and particularly in influencer marketing, it's a bit of a wild west. And I said to Andrew, who's representing this industry? Who has got their back? Who's looking at best practice? And we just looked at each other as if to say, well, like, nobody is. Yeah. So not long after that, we formed the influence division of the Branded Content Marketing Association. I now chair the industry body that relates to that. We've created a set of industry best practice guidelines. And then from there on in, I mean, the book happened, the podcast, writing for the Evening Standard. And then in January this year, I part-time, I joined a company called Audience to Media as their Chief Strategy Officer. So in a way, I'm not only looking after the industry body perspective, but also working sort of agency side. It's been quite fascinating to see. And I love being around lots of young people as well. I think they've got a lot to teach us older mortals.
Yeah, absolutely, agreed. But I guess that must really give you a really good perspective, having almost a foot in both camps, where you're representing influencers but also working agency side, so you can really see it from both the brand and the influencer's perspective, which must be quite unique.
Oh yeah, it does. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm heavily involved in sort of campaigns and stuff like that, but in a way, it's just nice to see how influencer marketing is growing all around the world. I mean, I've just not long come back from Brazil because I was promoting the Portuguese version of my book, and we've also made an influencer marketing documentary with the publishers in Brazil. Oh, wow. Everybody says to me, "Oh, Gordon, can I have a look? Can I watch it?" But I said, "Well, only if you can speak Portuguese." So it's really crazy to see myself on the big screen there, and the tickets to this event sold out in 1 minute. I mean, honestly, the Brazilians love influencer marketing. They go wild for it, and some of their big YouTubers are into 6, 7. In fact, one of the people that was on this documentary had around 18 million followers on our Instagram. Wow. So it's just insane, And they've been so gracious in the book and how well it's been received. And just going back to the book, you know, if you can imagine, 2018, I knew nothing about influencer marketing. Most people think I've been in it for years, but the reality is I didn't. But what I did do is I wrote the book based upon what I wanted to know about the industry. So in a way, I had no preconceived ideas or, you know, I think as you're an author, you can be off-put by having a look at lots of other marketing authors. Oh my goodness, am I going to be able to write a book quite like that? But actually, I think just writing it for somebody that hadn't got a huge amount of experience and bringing in loads of other contributors, I think it's one of the reasons why it's been so successful, really.
No, 100%. I think we're just coming back to that sort of the experience around influencer marketing. The term itself is still quite in its infancy, isn't it? Because although it's perhaps been happening for, you know, maybe 10 years or so, the actual term influencer marketing has maybe only been on the scene for, you know, maybe 5, 6, or it's been on people's radars for a short period of time, it feels like.
Oh yeah, I mean it's literally word of mouth marketing. I mean we've trusted the opinions of others for years and years and years. I mean if you think about even you know, Santa Claus, Coca-Cola, and some of these, you know, the man from Milk Tray, and some of these other interesting characters that advertisers have used, characters and people, as part of their advertising. It's been really effective. And now, how often do we ask the opinions of our friends and family and people before we make an informed buying decision? And I think there was a recent survey that I was looking at from, I think it was Gartner, that said amongst Gen Zs they trust traditional advertising to the tune of just 1%.
Yeah,
so
okay.
that's basically, well, it is a bit scary, but what it's basically saying is they're more likely to want to listen to their YouTube reviewer, watch content on YouTube or TikTok or any of these other sort of interesting channels than they will, you know, get it from mainstream media. In fact, during the pandemic, even the government was hard pressed to reach some of these younger millennials, and that's why they used influencers, I think, for the first time to get people to wash their hands. And it's really quite interesting to see how that worked, really.
It's interesting because I suppose the first thing we should do before we get stuck into the depths of influencer marketing is really define what it is. And I think when I try and think of what I think, you know, influencer marketing means to me, particularly in the modern marketing era, or as long as I can remember, my first memory of what I would call influencer marketing was probably in 2012 when I look back to Gymshark. When Gymshark first started, Ben Francis sat in his bedroom, printing logos onto the shirt and then essentially giving them to high impact Instagram users
Trainers.
with exactly that. Those that were, you know, gym enthusiasts or nutritionists. And that, for me, felt as though that was even before the term influencer marketing was a thing. So I guess really, Gordon, because it's evolved so much as well now, hasn't it? It's no longer giving a product to somebody and asking them to upload a photo. It's really quite dynamic now, influencer marketing. So what does influencer marketing mean to you?
Well, I think it's about, it's about promoting a product or service through an individual that has got an engaged audience and somebody that has trusted opinion that people want to connect with and engage. And I think that's really what it's about. Brands are now wanting to find new audiences. They're wanting to find emotional experiences with their brands. And we're almost in the attention economy now. The great things about influencers are, it's almost that real-time connection with the consumers. If I go and watch a television ad and I say, I don't believe in that, I don't like it, or whatever, I can't relate to the television ad, nor can the brand get any feedback. Whereas if somebody puts a story on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, those comments can be, amazing feedback for not only the influencer, but of course the brand. And that's why now brands are realizing this isn't, you can use influencer marketing not just as a promotional tool, but an invaluable research tool about developing and growing new markets, and testing different types of products. In fact, we've even seen examples of where, I think brands like Nike, for example, have started to ask some of their top influencers to see what types of comfort, new types of footwear could work really, really well. And I think when they get feedback that's really positive and encouraging, and then that product is launched, don't you think that's amazing that those individuals have had some part of the experience of creating that finished product? That's not going to happen on almost any other form of media.
No, that's it. And I think that's why I think it's so exciting. I was so keen to talk to you today, is because it has evolved so much in the last few years to become, like we say, not just giving a product to someone anymore. There's all these, they're now having input in products, and it's really quite an interesting space to be involved in, I'd imagine. Which kind of brings me on to my next question, actually. So if I'm a brand, how do you choose the right influencer to partner with? I mean, because is it a value alignment thing? Or is it an authenticity piece? What do you think? What really matters? And does size matter?
So that's a good question, and I think the most important thing, and it's still, by the way, the biggest and most challenging thing for brands, is how to find the right influencers, and that is why there are influencer agencies, influencer platforms that have grown in the last 3 or 4 years to unprecedented size. I think there's about 1,300 influencer platforms around the world at the moment, which is huge. And a reason I think those have come about is to try and make it easier for brands and PR agencies, social media, to make that process easier. But yes, in a nutshell, what you want to find is somebody who not only the individual, but whose audience really aligns with your brand. Now, sometimes you could look at an influencer and you could say, right, I like the aesthetic, I like what I'm seeing in the type of content, but you have no idea what the followers' makeup is. And that is critical. It's something that certainly we have at Audience to Media, is huge access to data. And it's really, really important that, because you want to know, for example, I know a fashion influencer, for example, who on the face of it has got about 600,000 followers, looks amazing, great content, reasonably good engagement, but whose follower base is largely in America. And she's based over here. Now, you wouldn't know that unless you looked at it. So if you've got a British fashion brand that you're looking to promote, that you're selling over here, well, then 60% of her audience is completely wasted. Do you see what I mean? It's really important, and there's some great tools out there that enable you not only to look at the follower location, but also the age profile, the engagement rate of the individual. You're likely to get a higher level of engagement on a nano and micro influencer than you would on a celebrity or macro influencer, but that's also because of the sheer size. I also think quality really does matter, and many of the influencer tools now will look at this. We, for example, at Audience to Media, will have a minimum of 80% credibility score before we'll actually consider them for a campaign. And the reason we want to do that is because we want them to be very responsive to their audience, and the more responsive they are, the more likely they are to get a better return in terms of connection with the client's websites, or downloads, or comments and likes, all that sort of stuff. And obviously what we don't want is people that have bought followers, people that have got bots, or irrelevant audience. And also we can determine the interests from those audiences as well. So there's some really, and I think the technology and the data is evolving constantly. I know there's one platform that supposedly can tell the marital status of the follower base and the employment status of the follower base. So I don't know quite how they do that, but the point is, what we're getting now is some really, really granular detail, which for a brand's point of view, to be able to literally target so finely, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, it's the bit about demographic there is really interesting, where I think, like you say, not just the brand value alignment, but also the audience persona, making sure those two marry up. One thing you touched on there I'd really like to explore a bit more was audience size. You mentioned nano and micro and mid-tier influencers. Does size matter for you in terms of the sort of an influencer's audience size, or is it more about like the engagement of that audience?
I think the relevance. I mean, for example, if you had somebody that was very, very niche, like I don't know, a microbiologist, scientist or something who still could be an influencer. By the way, when we talk about influencers, it's not just about an Instagram influencer. It's anybody that's a sort of a go-to person in their niche, you know, an industry expert, a chemist, a scholar. All these people could well be influencers. They may not term themselves as influencers. So yeah, they may have a way smaller quantity of followers, for example, but the relevance of that is going to be much, much higher. And that's really what we want more than anything else. You know, if you were a fishing rod manufacturer, you're not likely to find people that have got tens of thousands on Instagram, but what you might find is somebody that's got, I don't know, 1,000 followers on their Instagram, and they're regularly at the lake, and they're talking about the fish that they've caught. They're maybe reviewing different types of kit. You know, the chances are, because it's such an engaged community, as long as the content is all about fishing and not just like kids away at the weekend or pets or anything that's different from that, then the chances are a brand would want to be connected to people like that. And also, by the way, campaigns are rarely involving just one influencer. It's a number of them, and I think the reason why that is the case is because it allows you to tap into different markets as well.
So it's very much an authenticity thing, you think, in terms of that influencer being a respected voice in a particular space.
Exactly right.
So how do we tell if, coming back to authenticity there, how do we know if an influencer, their follower base hasn't been bought or isn't a load of bot accounts? Is it down to engage? Can you tell by engagement rate? Or
We can tell by, I mean, the average, for example, on Instagram is about 1.7%. So if somebody's at like 0.5%, you know, that's not particularly good.
would that indicate to you that they perhaps bought followers or their bot accounts?
Maybe it's certainly a reddish flag. The other thing, of course, is the spike in their follower growth. So you're able to determine how many followers they're getting on a weekly or monthly basis. So suddenly that shoots up quite significantly. Yeah. Now it's not a guaranteed red flag. I mean, I know a friend of mine who appeared on Too Hot to Handle, and she had 2,500 followers on Instagram on the Thursday before it aired on Netflix, and 1 week later she was like over 1 million. You know, so it was
a bit of virality, or
so there are extenuating circumstances around that, but largely yes. If there's a large spike in that.
Interesting. So just coming back to sort of influencers, and if we're putting together a campaign, let's say, what does a good brief look like for an influencer? Because we're a performance marketing agency, and you know, we all know what good and bad briefs look like. You know, for me, a bad brief is, you know, one that isn't measurable, with no KPIs. But if we're working with an influencer, how do we put together a good brief?
Well, okay, it's a very good question. It's something I feel really quite strongly about, because actually you take a lot of care when you hire somebody to do a job for them. You wouldn't go out and ask your salespeople just go and knock on loads of doors and speak to people without giving them enough training. Now, you don't necessarily always have that with an influencer, but give them the very basics about what your brand values are, brand guidelines, the type of content that you are ideally looking for. Good brands will put out like mood boards and target personas, competitors that the brand may have, because what you do not want is, you don't want the influencer to go and create some content that is, oh no, that's not what we meant, because actually all that's going to do is irritate the influencer, because they've got to go and do it all over again, because obviously every piece of content has to be approved. So I think stuff like hashtags is useful guidance for them as well. That's not to say that the influencer doesn't know about that, but there could be some ones that you specifically want.
And is that the hashtags, is that to empower them to be able to go and view those hashtags and the other types of content that's being created around that particular topic?
Yeah, what you're trying to do, yes, they are the creators at the end of the day, but it's like anything. If it's too wide, then you are leaving it too open to interpretation. And the more guidance you give them, I think the better. I mean, ideally, if there's a way where you can jump on a call with them and just bounce some ideas around as well, great. That isn't always the case, of course, but and be very specific, like when you want the content to go live. What they don't like as well is stuff that needs to be turned around in like 24 hours or 2 or 3 days. I mean, that, you know, if they need to go and take some content maybe at a location, be mindful that they may well be also having other campaigns going on there. You know, one of the reasons that people struggle to get responses from influencers is because actually the good ones are really busy. Yeah. They've got a lot going on, so treat them with respect. You know, it's not like, oh, just taking a picture or taking a video. You know, there's a lot that goes into that before. You know, what about the research, the thinking, the ideation? I mean, I often think some of these individuals are the new creative agencies, quite frankly. They are multi-talented in so many ways. And why would you not treat them with the respect that you would booking a major advertising agency?
No, 100%. I completely agree. Which you've sort of answered my next question there, because I was really interested to find out, in terms of creative, how much freedom you should really give influencers. Should they be open to being able to create their own copy, generate the idea, post at the time they think is best, or is it a case of should that be driven by the advertiser? Or
well, first and foremost, you should. One thing is to have a brief. A second thing is to have a contract. Right. No question about that. You must be absolutely clear, and the reason for that is to protect both parties, because there's nothing worse than if you're vague about, oh, well, post it when you like, and then all of a sudden, well, you didn't put any parameters in when that was. Oh yes, but what we meant was in the next week. Well, you didn't actually say that. Yeah. So I think it's all about making sure that you're specific about what you want. But there is a caveat to that, because sometimes brands are too specific, and they say, we want you to say this, 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 and this. And the influencer would not normally talk in those in that way. In other words, what the most important thing to an influencer is their audience, without a question of a doubt. And the tone of voice that the influencer uses is paramount. So it's important that it doesn't look like they're just literally scripting and reading out or something on their video that has clearly been scripted, because it just wouldn't sound authentic. And remember, we mentioned the word authentic a few minutes ago. They've built their audiences because they're authentic, because they like the content they create. And often the influencer are better placed to promote the brand's brand than they are to their channel. Yeah. So I think it's really important that there is that discussion about a certain degree of flexibility. Well, why would you otherwise, if you want something so prescriptive, go and do an ad on TV or radio or whatever, you know?
I mean, I completely agree. And I think that brings me on to my next point about creativity, really. So, as we said earlier, you know, influencer marketing has evolved so much. It's no longer giving a product to an influencer and off you go. Have you got any great examples of where you can be creative with influencer marketing? Because I saw something the other day, actually, where a brand had used an AR filter, which was given then to an influencer who then promoted that to the community to sort of drive engagement. But are there other ways you can be creative with influencer marketing?
Well, gifting, of course, has been hugely popular. I mean, even stuff like unboxing videos. Yeah. I love this way of almost, bringing the audience in and creating this sort of excitement. Yeah. When a new product is launched, look at these amazing things here, and what we're getting is good old features and benefits, described in a way that is very, very engaging and what seems so natural. If I look at some of the traditional TV channels, I think, if I'm honest, some of these young influencers are killing it in comparison. Yeah. Because they almost don't know what the history of TV advertising was all about in comparison to the way that they're doing it. And I really love that. Are there any specific campaigns that jump out at me? I think also cause-related things can work really well. So where people, you know, that whole body positive thing that Nivea have done and really got people talking about it and sharing ideas, because there is some stigma attached with some of these influencers are living the life of O'Reilly and oh, I just want to be like that, and my life isn't like that. So I think where there are campaigns that are very diverse, supportive, particularly in you know, a number of different communities, different cultures, I think they tend to work really well, because it's still about being inclusive at the end of the day. Why would you, there was a great example actually of somebody I interviewed on my podcast, which is called Influence actually, and it was all about influencers that are new retailers. And it was a lady called Louisa Hatt, and she was a woman of colour, content creator up in Edinburgh, and she did a campaign for a quintessentially English brand. And perhaps you wouldn't have thought some in the ethnic community would have taken to that type of product range, but she did an amazing piece of content, and a number of her followers responded and said, I just want to say, amazing. I love what you've done with this content. I wouldn't have even considered buying from that brand if it hadn't been for the way that you embraced it and engaged with it. So it was almost, and of course that is like liquid gold for a brand. She's just telling the story into a new market that perhaps some of these other brands, and that's why I feel quite strongly that brands that are not inclusive in the way that they embrace influencers are really missing out. And I don't mean don't just mean women, you know, women of colour. I mean, you know, to the LGBT community and a wider range. You know, we should be embracing in all campaigns. Really, we should.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's a really good opportunity, when executed correctly, to humanise a brand and for brands to become more socially and culturally aware. No, 100%. Okay, so Gordon, the next thing I'd really like to know more about, particularly as a performance marketing agency, is really the measurement of the campaign. So I suppose as a marketing agency that works with a lot of e-commerce brands, you know, when we're working with influencers, it's easy to track revenue and through things like affiliate links. And also, you know, using UTM parameters, we can sort of track the behaviour through the website and things. But we also have the channel level data, so the metrics, engagement, etc., within TikTok and Instagram. But for yourself, what do you think? How do we define success with an influencer marketing campaign?
Well, I have to say, it's all about setting the right goals at the beginning. You know, you can only measure what's been managed, and the more specific you are, the better. And the more I think you can involve the influencer, because they, you know, remember, they want something to land well. They want the campaign to work. And if they think it's unrealistic, they're also going to tell you that as well. So I think my message is always try and work together. But equally, influencer marketing is not a silver bullet, right? If you just, and this is where I think some people that have bad results with influencers, often it's because they've not found the right person that really resonates or is more of a sales driven individual, because there's definitely influencers out there that are more sales orientated, and rather than ones that are much more content creator driven. And it's really understanding which is which, because you can get greater brand awareness often with a bigger influencer, and that can be, you know, some of the top line things are going to be, you know, likes, comments, shares, dwell time on videos, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, what you want to do is to get them to convert to landing pages, which is a good way of creating something unique for a specific campaign. Or what is common on a lot of companies that are promoting apps, it's the number of downloads. But you should also be realistic. You know, influencer marketing can work really well when it's part of an overall campaign where you're doing other types of things. You know, it also takes time for that brand to build its awareness with the influencer's followers. So, you know, I mean, good examples can be with events, for example, and festivals. You know, for example, specific codes for the influencers to use, ticket discount for festivals or something like that, or for conferences. We've talked quite a lot also today about Instagram and TikTok, and we shouldn't for a moment underestimate the importance of some of the other networks. There's a huge growth in B2B influencers, for example. In fact, I'm just writing an article for the London Evening Standard on fintech influencers. Of course, that in itself has been a huge growth sector. So, and they would typically have their engagement on LinkedIn and Twitter more than they would perhaps on Instagram. But yeah, I mean, it's finding the right metric linked into the original goals that you were set. I mean, also make sure that those are smart goals, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, realistically, and timely, you know.
Yeah, I'm glad you said something just a second ago that you think influencer marketing is really important. That it's part of a wider campaign, like an integrated campaign, which I'm a strongly believer in as well. That I think, you know, for a campaign to be successful, there has to be multiple channels, you know, and whatnot. So yeah, I'm really glad you said that.
Multi-channel,
that's great. It must be, omni-channel
and paid social. I mean, I know that you're in this as well, and you know, some of the best campaigns are influencer content amplified by paid ads.
Yeah, I think it always comes back to the age-old marketing funnel, doesn't it? You know, using, you know, might be prospecting at the top of the funnel with paid social and maybe paid search when they're sort of in the consideration phase, remarketing to people a bit further down the funnel, and then email marketing once you have the lead and things like that. So yeah, it's great that influencer marketing can work as part of that wider campaign framework. But yeah, I suppose sort of just coming back to yourself now, Gordon, you've written a book on influencer marketing strategy. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what we can expect to read in the book?
Yes, so it pretty much covers all the aspects of influencer marketing strategy, you know, through right from the start, how to find influencers, what to look for, how to engage with them and work with them, negotiate with them, what type of campaigns work well. I've put a number of case studies in the book. We've got a glossary of terms in there, and loads of interviews from other people within the industry, which I felt was really, really important. Given that, you know, back, as I said, in 2018, I was fairly new to it, I really wanted this to be almost like an encyclopedia of information, and that's exactly what it is.
That's great. That's perfect. That's exactly what we all need. So that's great. Gordon, thanks so much for your time today. If people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you? On LinkedIn?
Yep, obviously I'm on all the channels, even, dare I say, TikTok. And you can find me, I've got my own website, which is gordonglenister.com, and you can also find out some more about the podcast that I host, and indeed my own influencer marketing training program to help people become more influential.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, Gordon. Have a great day.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.